Mia adjusted the strap of her purse nervously as she approached the front door of her parents' house. It was a modest but well-kept two-story home in the suburbs, the kind of house she had spent her entire childhood in. Yet, every time she came back, it felt a little less like home. The vibrant memories of her youth had long been overshadowed by years of cold remarks, comparisons to her siblings, and a lingering sense of inadequacy. Tonight was no exception. Her father had insisted on hosting a family dinner, something they hadn't done in months. Mia suspected it wasn't out of a desire to reconnect, but because her mother had some new gossip to share, and her father wanted to boast about her brother Liam's latest accomplishment. Still, she came. She always came, no matter how much the evening would drain her. Her 6-year-old son Oliver skipped beside her, his small hand tucked into hers. "Do you think Grandpa has those chocolate cookies again?" Oliver asked, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Maybe," Mia said, forcing a smile. "But remember, you've got to eat dinner first." Oliver nodded earnestly as Mia rang the doorbell. Within seconds, the door swung open and her mother appeared, her face lighting up as she spotted Oliver. "There's my handsome grandson," she exclaimed, bending down to pull him into a hug. Her warm smile faltered slightly when she glanced up at Mia. "Oh, you're here too. Come in, come in." Mia bit back the sting of the comment and stepped inside. The familiar smell of her mother's cooking wafted through the air, a comforting blend of rosemary and roasted chicken. She followed her mother into the living room, where her father sat in his recliner, flipping through the channels on the TV. Liam was already there, lounging on the couch with a beer in hand, his wife, Jessica, perched elegantly beside him. Jessica looked up and gave Mia a polite nod, but Liam didn't even glance in her direction. "Hey," Mia said softly, unsure if anyone even heard her over the noise of the TV and the lively chatter between her parents and Liam. "Mia, you're late," her father said gruffly, not looking up from the screen. "Dinner was supposed to start at 6. "It's 6:05, Mia replied, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Still late," he muttered, shaking his head. Mia swallowed hard and guided Oliver to a spot on the floor near the coffee table, where he began to play with a small car he'd brought along. She took a seat in an armchair, feeling as though she were intruding on someone else's gathering rather than attending a family dinner. The conversation flowed easily among the others, dominated by Liam recounting a recent business trip to New York. He worked as a regional manager for a large tech company, a job that came with a hefty salary and plenty of perks. Mia listened as he described the luxury hotel he stayed in and the high-profile clients he met, her parents hanging on his every word. "That's so impressive, Liam," her mother said, beaming. "You've really made something of yourself. We're so proud of you." Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with pride. "He's worked so hard to get where he is. It's no surprise he's being considered for a promotion." Mia kept her eyes on Oliver, who was quietly driving his toy car across the carpet. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing he was absorbing the atmosphere just as much as she was. He didn't need to hear how much more her parents valued Liam. "Dinner's ready," her mother announced, and everyone filed into the dining room. The table was set with her mother's best dishes, the centerpiece a large platter of roast chicken surrounded by roasted vegetables and fresh bread. Mia took a seat near the end of the table, with Oliver beside her. The others took their usual spots, with her father at the head of the table and Liam on his right. As they began eating, the conversation inevitably turned to family matters. Her father launched into a long-winded story about their upcoming plans to remodel the kitchen, while her mother nodded enthusiastically. Mia listened silently, occasionally cutting up Oliver's chicken and encouraging him to eat his vegetables. "And Liam," her father said suddenly, turning to his son, "have you thought any more about that property we were discussing?" Mia looked up, confused. "What property?" Her father hesitated, glancing at her mother, who gave him a subtle nod. "Well," he began, "your mother and I have been talking about what to do with the house when we're gone. We've decided it makes the most sense to leave it to Liam." Mia blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "You're leaving the house to Liam?" she repeated, her voice quieter than she intended. "Of course," her father said matter-of-factly. "Liam has a family to take care of. It wouldn't make sense for you to have it, not with your situation." "My situation?" Mia asked, her chest tightening. "You know," her mother interjected, her tone overly sympathetic. "You're a single mom, you rent, and well, you're still figuring things out." Mia felt her cheeks flush with heat. "I have a family too," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced at Oliver, who was thankfully too engrossed in his dinner to notice the tension. Her father waved a hand dismissively. "It's not personal, Mia. We're just being practical. Liam's stable, he's got a wife and kids. He can take care of the house." Mia's appetite vanished. She stared down at her plate, trying to process what she'd just heard. She had always known her parents favored Liam, but this was different. This wasn't just about praise or attention, this was about legacy, about their belief in who mattered more. And it was clear she didn't. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Mia barely spoke, her mind racing with a mix of anger, sadness, and frustration. When dessert was served, her father made a joke about her being late to everything, earning a hearty laugh from Liam and her mother. Mia forced a tight smile, biting back the urge to lash out. She knew it wouldn't make a difference. They wouldn't understand. When the meal was finally over, Mia helped Oliver into his coat and grabbed their things. As they said their goodbyes, her mother pulled her aside. "Don't take it personally, Mia," she said softly. "We're just thinking about what's best for the family." Mia nodded, too drained to argue. "Good night, Mom." As she drove home, Oliver fell asleep in the back seat, his small hand clutching his toy car. Mia glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her heart aching. She had tried so hard to shield him from her family's favoritism, but she knew it was impossible to hide forever. For his sake, she needed to find a way to break free from their judgment and build something better for the two of them. She just didn't know how yet. Mia woke up to the sharp ringing of her phone, the sound cutting through the early morning silence of her small apartment. Her first thought was Oliver, still asleep in the next room. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand, 5:42 a.m. Who would call this early? Heart pounding slightly, she grabbed her phone, squinting at the screen. It was Liam. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Liam rarely called her unless he needed something. Pressing the phone to her ear, she mumbled, "Hello?" "Mia." Liam's voice was unusually tense. "It's Dad. He had a heart attack last night. They took him to County General." Mia sat up abruptly, the sleep clearing from her mind. "What? Is he okay? What happened?" "He's stable now, but it was serious. They're running more tests. Mom's at the hospital with him." For a moment, Mia was silent, processing the news. "I'll get there as soon as I can," she said finally, already swinging her legs out of bed. "There's no rush," Liam added, his tone clipped. "I'm here and Mom's got things under control." Mia frowned, but she didn't argue. "I'll still come," she said firmly. By 6:30 a.m., Ia had dropped Oliver off with a neighbor and was pulling into the hospital parking lot. The building loomed large against the pale morning sky, its fluorescent lights casting an uninviting glow. She hurried inside, the scent of antiseptic and faint coffee filling her nose as she navigated the maze of corridors to the cardiac ward. When she found the waiting room, her mother was sitting in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee. She looked up as Mia approached, her expression immediately turning into one of thinly veiled annoyance. "Oh, you came," her mother said flatly. "Of course I came," Mia replied, lowering herself into a chair beside her. "How's Dad?" Her mother sighed, as if the question itself was a burden. "The doctors say he's stable, but they're monitoring him closely. It was a mild heart attack, but it could have been much worse." Mia nodded, relieved but still uneasy. "Can I see him?" Her mother shook her head. "Not yet. They're running tests." There was a long pause. Mia glanced at the clock on the wall, the ticking second hand amplifying the silence. She wanted to ask more questions, to offer some kind of support, but her mother's body language was closed off, her focus entirely on the cup in her hands. Just then, Liam appeared in the doorway, his presence commanding as usual. He was dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, as if he were on his way to a business meeting instead of a hospital. "Hey," he said, acknowledging Mia with a brief nod before turning to their mother. "I talked to the doctor. Dad might be here a few more days, but they're optimistic about his recovery." "That's good," Mia said, but Liam didn't respond. Instead, he sat down beside their mother, the two of them immediately launching into a conversation about logistics, what medications their father would need, whether his diet should change, and how to handle his recovery at home. Mia listened quietly, feeling more like an outsider with each passing minute. Her opinion wasn't asked for, and when she tried to interject, Liam smoothly talked over her. After half an hour, she stood up. "I'm going to grab some coffee," she said, though she didn't really want any. She just needed to get out of the room. As she walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the growing sense of frustration. She had come to support her family, yet she felt invisible. It wasn't a new feeling, but it stung more sharply in moments like these. When she returned, Liam was waiting for her near the vending machines. "Mia," he said, his tone casual but with an edge of purpose, "we need to talk." She crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "What's up?" "Mom and I were discussing Dad's recovery," he began, his voice adopting the measured tone he used in his corporate meetings. "It's going to take a lot of time and effort. He'll need someone to drive him to appointments, help with meals, and keep an eye on him when Mom's not around." Mia narrowed her eyes. "And you're telling me this because?" "Well, you have a more flexible schedule than I do," Liam said matter-of-factly, "and Mom can't do everything on her own." Mia felt a flash of anger. "Wait a minute. You're asking me to handle all of this? What about you?" Liam sighed, as if her question was unreasonable. "Mia, I have a full-time job. Jessica and I have the kids to take care of. You work part-time, and you only have Oliver. It makes sense." "Only Oliver?" Mia repeated, her voice rising slightly. "He's not some minor detail in my life, Liam. He's my whole life." "Keep your voice down," Liam said, glancing around. "I'm just saying you're in a better position to help. It's not that big of a deal." Mia stared at him, incredulous. "Not that big of a deal? You're asking me to completely rearrange my life to take care of Dad because you're too busy? This isn't about logistics, Liam. It's about responsibility, and you're trying to dump it all on me." Liam's expression hardened. "Look, if you don't want to step up, just say so. But don't act like I'm being unreasonable." Mia opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, their mother appeared, her face tight with irritation. "What's going on here?" she asked sharply. "Nothing," Liam said quickly. "I was just explaining to Mia what needs to be done for Dad's recovery." Her mother's gaze shifted to Mia, her expression unreadable. "Liam's right, you know. Someone has to help, and it's not like you have a lot going on." Mia felt the familiar sting of their words, but this time it was mixed with a simmering anger. "I'll think about it," she said curtly, brushing past them and heading back to the waiting room. For the rest of the day, Mia stayed by her father's bedside, even after Liam and her mother left. Her father was groggy but in good spirits, joking weakly with the nurses and occasionally dozing off. Mia held his hand, feeling a mix of love and resentment toward the man who had always favored Liam, even now. When visiting hours ended, she kissed her father's cheek and promised to come back the next day. As she drove home, her mind raced with conflicting emotions. She wanted to help her father, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her family was taking advantage of her. They didn't value her, yet they expected her to be there whenever it was convenient for them. By the time she got home, Oliver was asleep in his bed, and the apartment was quiet. Mia sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills and school notices she hadn't had time to deal with. She thought about what Liam had said, about her flexible schedule, and only Oliver. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But what choice did she have? Mia sighed, leaning back in her chair. She didn't have an answer yet, but one thing was clear: whatever decision she made, it had to be for her and Oliver, not for the approval of a family that would never truly see her. Mia sat in her small living room with a cup of tea in her hands, staring blankly at the walls. The events of the last few days were still weighing heavily on her. Her father was back at home now, recovering slowly, but the demands from Liam and her mother had only increased. Calls, texts, and friendly reminders from her family poured in daily. Liam and her mother seemed to have already decided Mia would take on the bulk of the caregiving responsibilities. She had tried to set boundaries, gently reminding them that she had Oliver to care for, her part-time job at the bookstore, and her own life to manage. But her concerns fell on deaf ears. It was as if they couldn't comprehend that her time and energy were just as valuable as Liam's. Today, after yet another call from her mother, Mia decided to stop by her parents' house to help out with dinner and check on her father. She told herself it was out of love for him, not obligation, but deep down, she wasn't so sure. When Mia arrived, the house was quiet. Her father was in the living room, reclined on the sofa with a blanket draped over him, watching an old Western movie. He looked pale and thinner than usual, but he smiled when he saw her. "There's my girl," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Come sit with me." Mia dropped her purse on the table and sat beside him. For a while they watched the movie in silence. She didn't mind, it was one of the few moments of peace she'd had in days. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked finally. "Oh, I'm all right," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Your mother's fussing too much, as usual. She keeps trying to feed me these awful green smoothies." Mia chuckled despite herself. "She just wants you to get better." "I know," he said, sighing. "But it's hard, Mia. I'm not used to sitting around like this. Makes a man feel useless." "You're not useless, Dad," Mia said softly. "You've done so much for this family." He gave her a faint smile, but his eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "I wish I'd done more for you, though. You've always had it tougher than Liam." Mia froze. She wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion or the painkillers talking, but her father's words hit her like a freight train. Was this his way of acknowledging the favoritism? "Bad," she began, unsure how to respond. Before she could say more, her mother walked in, carrying a tray with a bowl of soup and a glass of water. "Dinner's ready," she announced briskly, setting the tray down on the coffee table. She glanced at Mia. "Are you staying to eat?" "I can help with dishes after," Mia said, avoiding the question. Her mother raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. "Liam's supposed to stop by later," she said, sitting down on the armchair across from them. "He's bringing some paperwork for your father." Mia nodded absently, her mind still replaying her father's earlier comment. She felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever gotten from him, but it didn't erase years of feeling invisible. After dinner, Mia cleared the table and began washing the dishes while her mother fussed over her father in the living room. The familiar routine gave her a moment to think. She was about to dry the last plate when she noticed a stack of papers on the counter: hospital bills, insurance forms, and a few personal documents. One envelope, tucked underneath the pile, caught her eye. It was old, yellowed at the edges, and addressed to her father in her late grandfather's handwriting. Curious, Mia pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As she read the handwritten note, her heart began to race. "Dear Richard, when I'm gone, there's something I want you to take care of for me. The cottage by the lake should go to Mia. She's always had a special place in her heart for that spot, and I know it'll mean the world to her. Make sure she gets it. Love, Dad." Mia stared at the note, her mind reeling. The cottage by the lake. She had visited it a handful of times as a child, always imagining what it would be like to live there. It was a small, charming place surrounded by pine trees, with a view of the water that seemed to stretch on forever. She hadn't thought about it in years, assuming it had been sold or passed on to someone else. But according to this letter, her grandfather had intended for her to have it. Why had her father never told her? "Mia, are you almost done in there?" her mother called from the living room. Mia quickly folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. "Yeah, just finishing up," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, Mia sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread out in front of her. She read it over and over, her anger growing with each pass. Her father had known all this time that the cottage was meant for her, yet he'd said nothing. Had he kept it for himself? Or had he passed it on to Liam, just like everything else? The next morning, Mia decided to confront her father. She called her neighbor to watch Oliver again and drove straight to her parents' house. When she arrived, her father was alone in the living room, reading a newspaper. He looked up, surprised to see her. "Mia," he said, setting the paper aside. "What brings you here so early?" She didn't sit down. Instead, she pulled the letter out of her pocket and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked, unfolding it. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to guilt. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Mia demanded. Her father sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Mia, it's complicated." "It doesn't seem complicated to me," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Grandpa wanted me to have the cottage. He made that clear. So why didn't you honor his wishes?" Her father rubbed his temples, looking suddenly older. "I didn't think you could handle it," he admitted. "You were young, struggling to find your footing. I thought it would be better to hold on to it until you were ready." "And when would that be?" Mia shot back. "When I'm 50. When Liam decides it's okay." Her father looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Liam doesn't have anything to do with this." Mia scoffed. "Doesn't he? You've given him everything else, your support, your praise, the family home. And now I find out you've been keeping this from me too?" He didn't respond. Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm not asking for much, Dad. I just want what was meant for me. That cottage isn't just a piece of property, it's a chance for Oliver and me to have something of our own, something that no one can take away." Her father looked at her for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's yours. I'll make the arrangements." Mia felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that it had taken this much to get him to listen. She left the house feeling both victorious and exhausted, knowing this was only the beginning of her journey toward independence and self-worth. Mia stood on the creaking wooden porch of the lake cottage, the crisp air carrying the scent of pine and the faint hint of the lake. She had spent the last week preparing for this day, sorting through legal paperwork, arranging a visit with a local real estate agent to confirm the property transfer, and ensuring she could make the cottage habitable. Now, as she turned the key in the rusted lock and pushed the door open, a wave of emotions hit her: relief, anticipation, and a lingering tinge of anger at how long it had taken to reach this point. The interior was just as she remembered from her childhood visits, cozy but cluttered, with furniture that spoke to another era. Dust covered every surface and cobwebs hung in the corners, but the bones of the place were sturdy. Sunlight streamed through the large bay windows, reflecting off the water outside. For the first time in what felt like years, Mia felt a glimmer of possibility. She set Oliver down on the worn sofa, handing him his tablet to keep him occupied. "Just for a little while. Okay, buddy. Mommy has some work to do." Oliver nodded, already engrossed in his game, and Mia set about exploring the house. Each room brought back memories: the small bedroom where she had slept during summer visits, the kitchen where her grandfather used to bake pies, the little study filled with old books. In every corner she could feel her grandfather's presence, as though he had been waiting for her to finally return and claim what was hers. As she cleaned and organized, Mia's thoughts drifted to the last conversation she'd had with her father. After he'd agreed to transfer the cottage to her, he had tried to apologize not just for withholding the property, but for years of neglect and favoritism. "I know I've let you down," he had said, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong. You deserved more from me, Mia, and I'm sorry." Mia had wanted to believe him, to let go of the hurt and resentment she'd carried for so long. But forgiveness didn't come easily. "It's not just about the cottage, Dad," she had replied. "It's about all the times I felt like I didn't matter, like Liam was the only one you saw. I don't know if I can just forget that." Her father had nodded, his face pale and drawn. "I don't expect you to. But I hope we can start fresh. I want to do better for you and for Oliver." The conversation had left Mia conflicted. She wanted to move forward, to create a better relationship with her family, but she also knew she needed to prioritize herself and Oliver. The cottage was a step in the right direction, a chance to build something new, free from the shadows of her past. By the time she finished cleaning the living room, it was late afternoon. Oliver had fallen asleep on the sofa, and Mia stepped outside to sit on the porch. The lake was calm, its surface shimmering in the fading sunlight. She felt a rare sense of peace as she watched the water, her mind quiet for the first time in days. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back to reality. It was Liam. For a moment she considered ignoring the call, but then she sighed and answered. "What is it, Liam?" "Mom's been asking about you," he said without preamble. "She thinks it's rude that you haven't called to check on Dad today." Mia clenched her jaw, her hand tightening around the phone. "I was at the hospital every day for a week, Liam. I think I've done my part." "That's not how she sees it," Liam replied, his tone smug. "You know how Mom is." "Yeah, I do," Mia said sharply. "She's never satisfied, no matter what I do. And you know what? I'm done trying to please her." Liam was silent for a moment, clearly caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not going to keep bending over backward to meet everyone else's expectations while my own needs get ignored," Mia said, her voice firm. "I have Oliver to think about, and I'm finally doing something for us. If Mom or you have a problem with that, it's not my responsibility to fix it." "So that's it?" Liam said, his tone turning cold. "You're just going to walk away from the family?" "I'm not walking away," Mia said. "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." Before he could respond, Mia ended the call and put her phone on silent. She leaned back in the porch chair, feeling a sense of liberation she hadn't expected. For the first time, she wasn't letting her family dictate her choices. Over the next few weeks, Mia threw herself into transforming the cottage. She painted walls, scrubbed floors, and planted flowers in the overgrown garden. Oliver loved exploring the property, especially the small dock that stretched out into the lake. One afternoon, as they sat together on the dock, Oliver looked up at her and said, "Are we going to live here forever, Mommy?" Mia smiled, ruffling his hair. "Maybe not forever, but for a long time, I think." "Good," he said, leaning against her. "I like it here." Mia wrapped an arm around him, her heart swelling with love. For so long she had felt adrift, but now she was starting to feel anchored. A month later, her father and mother came to visit the cottage for the first time. Mia had been nervous about their reaction, especially her mother's, but she was determined to stand her ground. Her father looked around the property with a mix of nostalgia and pride. "You've done a good job here, Mia," he said, patting her shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud." Her mother was less enthusiastic, pointing out minor flaws and making passive-aggressive comments about the distance from town. But Mia didn't let it get to her. She had learned to tune out her mother's criticism and focus on what truly mattered. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light across the water, Mia sat with her parents on the porch, sipping tea. It wasn't a perfect picture of reconciliation, but it was a start. In the months that followed, Mia continued to build her new life at the cottage. She found a local school for Oliver, took on freelance work to supplement her income, and started making friends in the small lakeside community. Her relationship with her parents remained complicated, but it improved slowly. Her father made an effort to be more supportive, calling regularly to check in and even visiting more often. Her mother was still critical, but Mia no longer let it affect her as deeply. As for Liam, their relationship remained strained. He resented Mia's newfound independence and often accused her of abandoning the family. But Mia stood her ground, refusing to let his opinions dictate her choices. One evening, as she sat by the lake watching Oliver play, Mia realized she felt something she hadn't felt in years: contentment. The journey had been difficult, but she had finally found a place where she belonged, a place where she and Oliver could thrive, surrounded by the love and peace they both deserved. And for Mia, that was more than enough.